Greetings, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight, we'll continue our reading of Immiserable Slavery, the Thomas Thistlewood Diaries. We're on chapter 5, which is page 92 or 117 of the PDF if you have it, from 1760 following Tacky. Introduction. Thistlewood's many complaints about the slaves under his charge reflected in large measure the constant acts of individual resistance to bondage: running away, pretending illness, planting potato slips in the wrong way, and similar so called mistakes, maiming animals and other careless acts, damaging or losing tools and equipment, allowing livestock in the cane fields, poisoning foodstuffs, and on occasion, direct physical assault. All were used as means of protest. These individual resistances were annoying and sometimes dangerous to the master concerned, but posed no real threat to the general society and economy. For that to be achieved, a wider planning and coordination of resistance would be necessary. Of such larger and more ambitious attempts in 18th century Jamaica was Tacky's Rebellion of 1760, was undoubtedly the most formidable. Tacky, an Akan Negro from the Gold Coast and so described as Coromantan, was representative of an ethnic group described by Brian Edwards as distinguished by their firmness both of body and mind, and a ferocious disposition, but withal activity, courage, and a stubbornness, or what an ancient Roman would have deemed an elevation of soul, which prompts them to enterprises of difficulty and danger, and enables them to meet death in its most horrible shape with fortitude or indifference. So these men and women, these Akan people, were strong willed people. These were people that wanted freedom by any means. They were willing to die for it. So never let them tell you that we were not willing to fight for our liberation. Greetings, Forecast. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. The understood aim of Tacky's rebellion was the destruction of the whites and the establishment of Akan controlled states in which Akan leaders and their supporters, Akan or other, would enslave their defeated opponents and continue in the production of sugar and rum as well as foodstuffs. And this was their mistake. They thought that they could replace the slave owning class. And it's important to note that with this type of aim, you were doomed to fail. It is never just to destroy and replace the owning class, it's to destroy and replace the owning class with something different. It is not always easy to assess whether any particular act of resistance, individual or larger, was successful. Success means the achievement of an objective. The purposes of slave resistance were various: the annoyance of a particular master on a particular occasion, the removal by discharge, resignation or death of a master, the hindrance of a successful crop, the destruction of a building or cane field, and many others. One might go so far as to argue that if an individual slave carried out an act of resistance intended to annoy and was subsequently lashed by an infuriated master in an apoplectic fit of rage, he would have, at some cost to himself, achieved his aim. But in the all-embracing objective of island-wide takeover, such as Tacky's was said to be, there is no doubt the outcome would prove success or failure. The failure of Tacky's attempt resulted from three main disadvantages: the lack of a closely coordinated strategy of attack throughout the island, the superior firepower and battle tactics of the regular troops, the militia, and the Maroons once they had been mobilized, and the Achilles heel in the power of Obeah, which protected the charmed person from death, and if death should come, it would signify the weakness or unworthiness of the charmed rather than the charm itself. The death of a leader thus not only removed his leadership, but also threw doubt on the wisdom and propriety of his leadership. In Jamaica, as elsewhere in the Caribbean, the 18th century was punctuated by many acts of slave resistance and rebellion. But in Westmoreland, the year 1760 opened in quite an ordinary way. Tuesday, January 1st, 1760. Qua at Hill making baskets. Job and Dago in the canoe cutting grass for the cattle. Brought 24 bundles wild Scotch grass at 3 times. Began to wear a new neckcloth, number 6. Flanders hewing staves. Sent to paradise 5 young pigeons per Warsaw. In the evening, shot a night walker by the great pond side. Sent the Negro man to Mr. Stone this morning, per Jackie, who robbed his girls last night. He belongs to Colin Campbell, Esquire. In the morning, build bushes in the pasture, then took 40 hands upon the road, Plato and coffee, watching the canes, the rest of the hands carrying trash into the pens. At night, cleaned out the hogs' heads. Preparation were being made to make a crop. On the domestic scene, Mrs. Cope was brought to bed of a girl on the night of Saturday the 26th. Mr. Cope was paying frequent nightly visits to Egypt, where he would summon little Member, for whom he had a passion until mid-April, when he transferred his attentions to Sancho's wife, Cuba. Now remember, Sancho was like a slave driver, and Cuba was his wife. So this white man was like, I'm going to take your wife to a show and assert my continued dominance over every aspect of your life. Fibba was pregnant, but still at work in the great house cookroom. Her baby was not due until April. Meantime, she occasionally overstepped Thistlewood's view of her proper authority. Friday, January the 11th, that evening, reprimanded Pibba for her intermeddling with the field Negro's business and me. So Fibba was pregnant, felt that she had some privilege and position, and she was pregnant by Thistlewood, clearly, and she was intermeddling or getting in the middle of his business with the field Negroes. As we know, she was a woman of some property, and now she disposed of some of it. On the 27th of January, she sold her filly for £4 sterling and 10 shillings to William Ricketts' slave, Coffee, and wanted to give Thistlewood a present of 33 bits, which is a little over £1 sterling, which I, being at present scarce of accepted, but shall make myself debtor to her for it. And so he did, but he did not repay her till September. Some weeks later, on April 5th, she sold her mare Patience to the Negro man of Colonel Barclay's named Crossley for £7. He paid her £5 sterlings and 10 shillings down, and to pay the remaining 30 shillings in 3 months. So Fibba had some property and some assets that she could leverage in her during her enslavement in this environment. Then on the 28th, old Daphne came over from Salt River to attend to her, and at about 8 o'clock in the morning of Tuesday, the 29th of April, 1760, she was delivered of a boy. This was Mulatto John, Thistlewood's son. House Frank was sent over from Paradise to look after her for a few days, and Egypt Lucy was kept at home giving Fibba's child suck. So Fibba had a wet nurse. For a day or so, Fibba was unwell with a bad looseness, and on hearing of it from Thistlewood, Mrs. Cope sent her flour, wine, and cinnamon. At the end of the week, House Frank was recalled to Paradise and went laden with gifts, a cube of till and a diver for herself, and a roasting pig for Mrs. Cope. In her place, Mr. Moulds Frank came to take over the Egypt cookhouse until Fibba was up and about again. So bringing this mulatto child into the world took a lot out of Fibba, and she needed to rest and recover. And good, bad, or indifferent, he saw the necessity for that. There was, it seems, no heavier than usual incidents of slaves running away or of punishments inflicted. There were accidents and ailments. Thursday, February 28th, Coffee, coming over the bridge to bring the cart home with a load of cane tops, somehow or other let the cart jam him against the post and rails, tore one of his legs in a bad manner, and he tumbled into the river. Wrote to Dr. Gorse by Abraham. He soon came and sewed up the wound. Beck is sometimes lightheaded today. The doctor and I went to Hill to visit Celia, who has the ague and fever. I had the canoe ready to take us over. But old Celia did not recover. A week later, she died at Hill and was buried by old Sharper and Morris. In late March, Lincoln and Violent made a match, which means they got together. And as the cane cutting declined, the field hands were increasingly employed in other tasks. I wonder what those other tasks were. Was it just the work of the plantation, or were they working at natural increase? Tuesday, March the 4th, transplanted star apples, oranges, and shaddocks out of the garden into Top Hill Interval. Also planted Lignum vitae seed and the horse lilac seed and degreed intervals. Provisions, it seems, were scarce. On Sunday, April the 20th, Thistlewood spent most of the forenoon on the road westwards looking out for plantains. He got 100 for 4 bits, and so hands were employed planting corn and plantain suckers in the provision grounds. Vegetables such as cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, lettuce, parsley, spinach, and beets were being planted in the garden, and in the pasture they planted aloes. On some Sundays, as the pressures of the crop taking became less heavy, special relaxations were allowed, such as fishing in the great pond where they could get food for themselves. On Sunday, May the 4th, for instance, Ambo, Daniel, Dago, Kubina, Little Kwashi, and Jackie were given permission to fish. They got 20 large tarpons between them. As for Thistlewood himself, he contentedly followed his various interests. Wednesday, February the 20th, in the morning, rowed by Mr. Hungerford's away to the bay, and had our large canoe meet me at the westmost wharf. Went on board the ship Earl of Effingham, Captain Joseph Bellamy, but he was not on board, was detained a long time. They were so busy, and at last went down into the hold myself and found my 2 cases, which received and gave receipt for them. Breakfasted and dined with Mr. James Foote, who is mate, and Dr. Priest, young Cave. Then went to the bay again, bought of Mr. Francis Gallagher 4 new puncheons at 35 shillings each, which is equal to £7 sterling. Gave him an order on Mr. Cope for money and had his receipt. Brought them home in the canoe. Mason Quashie, Louis, Qua, Lincoln, and Flanders in the canoe. I rowed home, and the canoe got home soon after dark. So he was going about his day, breakfasting and socializing with the people there, even though the yield for the slaves were scarce. Something to remember. The next few days, his spare hours were spent opening his 2 cases and cataloging their contents, mostly flower and vegetable seeds. Catalogs and sample assortments were then sent to interested people such as Colonel Barclay, John Parkinson, Dr. Gorse, Mr. Cope, Randolph Donaldson, and others. A lingering clamminess notwithstanding, he had also by early May turned his sexual exercises with accustomed vigor. Friday, May 9th, in the morning, come Warsaw, laying down, top of the ladder, by the corn loft side in the curing house, standing up backward. In the evening come Amelia, who belonged to Miss Sally Porter, in my bed. She had been in the country selling soap and would sleep in my house. And there were visitors. On May 19th, for instance, Samuel Say and Joseph Roberts dined with him and enjoyed one of Fibba's pigs, roasted Madeira wine, and porter and punch. Of slave unrest there was no word. The usual militia exercises were, as usual, rather infrequently attended. The maroon parties were scarcely seen at Egypt, having paid only one visit on the morning of Friday, February the 1st, when they were entertained with some grog, and the restrictions on the slaves were not always observed. Friday, March 14th, 1760. Sold old Sharper the gun I bought from driver Quashie many years ago. He gave me only 10 shillings for her, but paid ready money. He will soon shoot alligators and such enough at Hill. So they were buying their old used rifles and shotguns. They were earning money, and they had some level of weaponry, but they didn't have the most recent, most updated weapons. But they had shotguns, they had old guns. On Sunday, May 20th, Thistlewood rode to Paul Island Estate and dined with Mr. John Parkinson. While there, about 4 p.m., Mr. Roberts come home from his mountain and brought news of a supposed insurrection tomorrow, when 3,000 Negro men were to muster in a certain place from Hanover and this parish, and told him by a strange Negro man who came to him in the mountain in the evening rode home. There was not, it would appear, much credence given to Mr. Roberts' account. It had been a peaceful crop season, just over, and now was the time for relaxation. Perhaps, hopefully, it was just another of those rumors from which, time to time, lent excitement to the conversation of whites. But was it? Not so many days before, at about 1 a.m. on Easter Monday morning, Tacky, a Coromantee slave on Frontier Estate in the parish of St. Mary, had led a small band of his fellows from Frontier and the adjacent Trinity Estates down into Port Maria. There, they had attacked the fort, killed the sentinel, and captured a large quantity of arms and ammunition. They then moved inland, attracting increasing numbers as they went firing through the estates: Trinity, Frontier, Ballard's Valley, Esher, and Haywood Hall, where they stopped to rest and celebrate and eat, and to celebrate and to eat. So this was a problem. Why were they stopping to celebrate and eat? You were supposed to keep going. Meanwhile, about 130 whites and trusty blacks, tolerably armed, had been mustered and were following in pursuit. News had been sent to the governor in Spanish Town, and 2 companies of regular troops and a band of Maroons from the Central Maroon Settlement at Scott's Hall had been dispatched in aid. Remember, I told you, you have to remember there were different types of Maroons. Some Maroons, these Maroons in particular, had made a deal with the British colonial government that they would be left alone, but they would help put down slave insurrections, and they would return runaway slaves. And as you can see, they often frequented Thistlewood's estate because he was often offering them refreshment and letting them spend the night. So they had an ongoing relationship. Militia troops, and Maroons attacked Tacky's forces and eventually scattered them into nearby woods, where Davy, a Maroon sharpshooter, shot and killed Tacky. His followers were soon defeated. The revolt was discovered to have been part of an island-wide plan, and before all the fighting was over in late September, there had been uprisings in St. Thomas in the east, St. John, Kingston, St. James, Hanover, and on a scale almost equal to that of St. Mary and Westmoreland. By then, over 50 whites had been killed, and nearly 400 slaves lost their lives in battle or in terrible punishments, including mutilations, gibbetings, and slow burnings. The rebel slaves, strengthened by charms provided by the obeah men, have fought and died with great courage. Tacky had been killed, but some others of the ringleaders being taken, and a general inclination to revolt appearing among all the Coromantee Negroes in the island, it was thought necessary to make a few terrible examples of some of the most guilty. Of 3 found guilty of killing whites employed on Ballard's Valley. One was condemned to be burnt, and the other two to be hung up alive in irons and left to perish in that dreadful situation. The wretch that was being burnt was made to sit on the ground, and his body being chained to an iron stake. The fire was applied to his feet. He uttered not a groan, and saw his legs reduced to ashes with the utmost firmness and composure. After which, one of his arms, by some means getting loose, he snatched a brand from the fire that was consuming him and flung it into the face of the executioner. Now, that quote is from Brian Edwards' book, History of the West Indies. And it says, as a young lad of 16, Edwards, the author, had been sent to his uncle Zachary Bailey, owner of Trinity Estate in St. Mary and other properties. He was there in 1760, and according to him, it was his uncle who had mustered the first body of men against Tackey. By the end of May, the revolt had broken out in Westmoreland. Mr. Roberts' news was accurate. For the next weeks, we take Mr. Thistlewood's record of events in that parish. On Monday, May 26, 1760, soon after midnight, Monsignors Say, Bowen, Walker, and Rumbold called me up and told me of Mr. Smith at Captain Forrest being murdered by the Negroes. Mr. Smith shot at about 10:15 or 9:45. Captain Hoare sadly chopped, and Captain George Richardson and Thomas Burns running to the bay on foot. A narrow escape they had. When we reached Colonel Barclay's, I galloped back immediately to Egypt and secured my keys, writings, and other effects, which had before neglected in my fright, because those who called me were some almost without clothes and rode bareback, telling me I should probably be murdered in a short time, and other rumors. Soon returned after I had put my things in order as well as I could, and was down at the bay at 2:00. Did duty till daylight, then was set at liberty by Mr. Antrobus to go home and take care of the estate. John Groves, the madman, shot at several Negro boys, wounded Oliver, Mr. Cunningham's waiting boy. Went to the bay without my orders or other information, but in the evening he returned. Soldiers were soon dispatched after the rebellious Negroes. Sailors and militia halted at Egypt, gave them 6 or 8 pails of grog, had a silver spoon stole in the hurry, and other minor effects. This happened around 9 a.m. Gave our Negroes today strange various reports with torments and confusion. Mr. Walker dined at Egypt, gave one John Turge belonging to the ship Peter Beckford, Captain Lovelace, also dinner that evening. Mr. Walker went away, but John Turge, John Groves, and a sailor who had fallen asleep in the bush and lost his arms had supper and kept watch by turn all night. So the soldier who had fallen asleep lost his gun. Had 4 Negro men kept watch at the hothouse door, pen gate, washhouse door, and curing house door, and had the words, "All is well," passed. Vast numbers of people belonging to the troop, militia, called, and etc., frequented alarms fired, and vast numbers of dispatches passing. Tuesday, May 27th, 1760, gave Morris a new hoe as he is now in the field, employed carrying the trash out of the mill house into the pens, cleaning up about the works and other minor tasks. Wrote to Mr. Forbes and sent a suspicious Negro to Gaul per coffee. The soldiers remaining that could be spared rode through Egypt to leeward about 1 p.m. Most of them, it seems, come from St. Elizabeth. The sailors commanded by Captain Watson returning, called and had grog again, gave the captain and the officers punch and bread and cheese. The sailors drunk, and Louis, Camina, Lincoln, and the others got guns and sad work amongst the sailors. At about 9 or 10 a.m., part of the troop and militia also halted here. A report of a party of rebellious Negroes are near us in the salt savannah. They stopped a canoe load with sugar and other provisions, gave Morris, Prince, Adam, Venus, Abba, Plato, Little Doll, and Thibba each a new dung basket. Egypt Lucy and Simon, little member, broached last year's puncheon of rum for to make grog for the troops and others. Our Hector is wanting in the afternoon. Come home. In the evening, Colonel Barclay and company called and drank porter. Let our Negroes sleep till the evening turnout time they watched last night. Lent the mate of the Earl of Effingham my horse to the bay, made Job go with him. Sent Dido to paradise, her belly big is almost at her time. In the evening, 2 gentlemen from Hanover begged for a mouthful of salt beef and plantain and a drink of toddy, all which I gave them. Had 2 Negroes armed watch all night. John Groves also. I lay down sometimes with my clothes on and slept little. Wednesday the 28th. Employed carrying dung out of the great pond and laying it upon heaps in the pasture by the pond side. Put up the sugar pots in the curing house, had a broken chain took off. In that morning, I sexually assaulted and came in Mazarine in the curing house behind the butt near the mule collar, gave her 2 bits. A guard of soldiers about 8 o'clock in the morning called and had grog. They guarded 21 Negro prisoners to the bay, 19 men and 2 women. Amongst the men was one of their grandees, his hair shaved in the form of a cap on his head. He was said to eat the heart and tongue of one of the white people he murdered, was to have been king. Grog gave a party of militia going into the country and to many others, gave Mr. Wheatley and 2 more gentlemen and Mr. Collins some broiled fish and plantains. Strange, confused reports. Some of the Old Hope and Colin Campbell's Negroes are gone. I want you to notice how he's giving away supplies and provisions. Things were scarce for the slaves, but not for him. Gave a sailor dinner who was going with the militia but is left behind. John Dufferty. He stayed all night and helped to keep watch. had strict watch kept, and the words, all's well, passed from one Negro to another. When the report was of the Old Hope Negroes being rose, perceived a strange alteration in ours. They are certainly very ready if they durst, and am pretty certain they were in the plot. By what John told me on Sunday evening, what they had said in the field on Saturday in the peepaw tree piece, that he, what signified him, he would dead, he would dead in a Egypt, etc., etc. And this is referencing a phrase that him would die in Egypt, talking about Thistlewood, right? Where the slaves might well have used that particular terminology. And from many other circumstances, Louis being over at Forest that night, Coffee and Job also very outrageous. So the field slaves were conspiring to overthrow Thistlewood on his plantation, but this one particular Negro, John, told him what they were planning because he had overheard them. And Mr. Thistlewood understood that his slaves were acting out because they planned to overthrow him, but they didn't. Thursday, May 29th, 1760, employed carrying out pond earth and dung as before. Flanders, the cooper, as usual. Benjamin at Paradise. In the morning, I came and sexually assaulted Barnett's Nancy on the ground near the main house. About 2 p.m., a mulatto boy and two Negro boys come running from Jacob's Field, the late Mr. Allen's, and reported that some Negroes come with a shout and fired 4 or 5 guns and began to tear the great house to pieces before they escaped. I immediately wrote to the commanding officer at Savannah Lamar and sent Job on horseback to express with it. A party of 14 horsemen were soon sent there. Immediately armed our Negroes and kept a strict guard and sharp lookout. So these were the trusty Negroes that he talked about. All the afternoon and night, being under dreadful apprehensions, as Mr. Joseph Johnson told me, we had but bad success, being defeated and some of our people killed, of which perceive our Negroes have good intelligence, being greatly elevated and ready to rise. Now we are in the most imminent danger. So, what he's saying is that our Negroes are smart. Saw Mr. John Jones' house burnt tonight, and others. Many parties of soldiers and other persons passed by to leeward in the dusk of the evening. 4 footmen called in the evening. I gave them refreshment. One of them could not bear the mosquitoes and went away in the middle of the night. The others lay in the great house piazza till daybreak. Gave a party of the militia porter to drink, who were guarding 6 prisoners down the bay. Friday the 30th, Negro men under arms as yesterday. Negro women pulling up weeds about the Negro houses and other activities. Several of our wounded came by this morning, and multitudes of Negroes carrying goods down to the bay from Colonel Ricketts' house. Mr. Reed from Long Pond came to see me. He says, great fear of Crawford's Negroes rising. Hid my old coins and secured a gallipot in the curing house. John and me kept strict watch all night, passing the words, "All is well," almost continually. Two Negroes in the mill house, one at the hothouse door, one at the mule pen, one at the wash house door, one at the curing house door, and me to walk the round. John and I are both almost spent. So he was tired. They were keeping watch. And they were keeping watch with these Negroes, right? And they were exhausted. Saturday, the 31st, the morning, part of the troop called and had grog. That morning, a guard carrying prisoners to the bay called, gave them grog. Amongst the prisoners are Mr. Foote's Coffee, who formerly worked here. Mr. Reed come over to see me. Come, Barnett's Nancy in the bed. That evening, several troopers and call. The attack put off till Monday, awaiting large reinforcements from distant parts. Arrived in a man of war with soldiers at Savannah Lamar Road. In the evening, Mr. Reed came and slept on my bed. I wonder why. He was warned by one of their Negroes to go off the estate, as one of their Coromantes was expected to come in the night with a party of rebellious Negroes to take all they could with them. Many of the well-affected Negroes left the estate lest they should be forced to join the rebels. So the revolution is never most of the workforce. The revolution is always a small dedicated force. Salt River Longqua burnt yesterday to leeward, and Paradise Dover hanged. Our Negroes had today, gave Egypt Lucy and Sphinx Cyphox tickets, kept a very strict watch all night. Sunday, June 1st, 1760, gave Jackie, Louie, Johnny, Margarita, and Fibba tickets to go to Roaring River to buy provisions. Also to Hector and Peter, Pero, Sarah, Cuba, Abba, Eve, Dover to Paradise, Egypt, Susanna, Quamina, Simon, Punch, Phyllis, Primus, Rosanna, Beck, and Juno, Little Member, Abigail, Little Quashi, Egypt Lucy, Derby, Morris, Little Liddy, Betty, Achilles, Philip, Toby, Ellen, Adam, Plato, Princess, Big Liddy, and Chloe. Many people called with Mr. Cope and company, gave them grog and porter. Mr. Moffat, Donaldson, Blakeney, and Wilson, guarding provisions and ammunition, called. I fitted them out with many things as pads, ropes, crooks, and other things, gave them grog and porter. A young goose died. At night, kept a strict watch as before. Monday the 2nd, Lincoln beat Violet again, and is very impudent and ill-minded. Achilles told Daniel if he did not take care, he would cut his head off in the bush. Witness, Egypt Lucy, Crochet, Hazat, Pero, and Margarine. That evening, he ran away. Mr. Henry Weech dined with me, just come from Moreland, almost spent. That evening, went away, cleaned about the works, threw up the wood hoops, carrying out pond earth. That evening, come, little member, in the bed. gave Abraham a ticket to Savannah Lamar, gave many people porter and grog. That evening, Mr. Solomon Cook called, wounded in the left shoulder with a slug, in the engagement today, which was very smart. Several of the rebellious Negroes killed, their provisions and town took. Also, most of their powder and a great deal of plunder as ruffled shirts, lace hats, shoes, stockings, cravats, and other finery, and fine mahogany chests full of clothes. They had fortified themselves with palisadoes and sundry walls, but we took it. Colonel Cujo's Negroes behaved with great bravery. Remember, Cujo was the maroon. The black shot from Hanover and Company had not much resolution. At night kept a very strict watch as before. Now remember, the black shot were bodies of trusted slaves who were sent out like rangers, distinct from the regular soldiers and the militia. Tuesday the 3rd, carrying out pond earth, etc. That morning, a sergeant of the regulars called. He was very ill, lay all day upon the cot and all night also. Ordered Abraham to attend him. Wrote to Mr. Robert Baker at Savannah Lamar, per Job, kept a strict watch all night. Achilles yet away. Many people called as usual, but not much done against the rebellious Negroes today. Wednesday, June the 4th, 1760, employed as before. Wrote to Lieutenant Preston and Dr. Cooper of His Majesty's 74th Regiment about the sergeant who is sick here, per coffee. Had a fowl killed for him. Some people who wanted to press my horse or exchange a bad gun for a good one threw a Madam Fading bottle of rum, presumably with the intention to hinder work on the estate. Madam Fate was a poisonous weed when mixed with other plants and steeped in rum, right? If applied to the arms and face, it was supposed to induce profound indolence, right? Right. Or exchange a bad gun for a good one threw a Madam Fading bottle of rum down at the house door, broke the bottle, and spilled the rum. Many people called all day long. That morning, moved 48 pots of sugar into the curing house, which is equal to 947 pots. So remember, they were still worried about profits. Mr. John Parkinson, Mr. Samuel Say, James Lawson, Mr. Lauderdale, and Mr. Williams of Quaku Hill, and a young man from the north side named Odell or Parr, I think, had stewed fish, crab, a boiled pigeon, and 2 broiled fowls. Punch, grog, and porter. Mistake. His name was Enos, and he was a driver at Midgham, Jacob Ricketts' estate. When a Negro belonging Will Ricketts' estate, Norward, PM, was going to be burnt at the bay, he told Mr. Thomas Tomlinson, Jr., bookkeeper, that if he would let him escape, he being of his guard, that he would give him 14 pistoles, or money, all the money he had with him, and make him overseer of Midgham. This Negro, although burnt by degrees with slow fire, made at a distance from him, never flinched, moved a foot, nor groaned or cried, oh. So we died brave deaths at Tacky. At night, kept guard as usual. Just in the dusk of the evening, Captain Forsyth and his company just arrived from St. Mary's, having quelled the rebellion there, halted at Egypt and had grog, then marched to leeward, when having got about 100 yards along the road past Colonel Barclay's canes, 2 guns were fired at them out of the woods, and Captain Forsyth immediately made his company fire at the place, but cannot tell if they did any execution. They had Abraham to guide for a guide to show them the near way to Mr. Crawford's messengers Edmondson, Leicester, Gallagher, and others, called going to the bay. Took a bag of powder, some cartouches or cartridges, cutlasses, and other provisions out of a house just by John Stewart's. The Negroes ran away at the sight of them. Thursday the 5th. Employed as before. Gave Kubina a ticket to paradise. Gave Lincoln and Syphox, Dago, and my Johnny tickets to go sell crabs. Dr. Parkinson called and breakfasted with me. Served our Negroes a pint of salt each and gave them a pail of molasses amongst them. That afternoon, I came in Fibber in the bed. Admiral Holmes was wrote down to the gentlemen of the parish that if they think it necessary, he will pick the choice men out of the whole fleet, bring them down in the Cambridge, and head his men himself, to keep them in order and under command. Very pretty indeed, gives great satisfaction. Mr. Walker from Jacobsfield dined with me. He's a bookkeeper. Also supped and slept in the yellow room. Achilles yet out. Abraham not returned from Captain Forsyth. At night kept a strict guard, heard a noise in the water between us and the salt savannah, in the part between the islands, seemingly like a multitude of horsemen in a hurry, but conjecture it must be cattle chased by some of the rebellious Negroes, about 1/3 of a mile from us. Friday, the 6th, employed as before, gave our Negroes a pail of molasses. Here yesterday, a soldier was shot by the rebellious Negroes and one of the militia named David Lander. Received a letter per Waterford from Mr. Robert Chambers at Mr. Cope's request. Write to Mr. Cope per degrees. That morning, John Witter, John Hutt, Thomas Copigi, and others called and drank porter, ate herrings, and other things, also a great many more, almost continually. The 6th sergeant, here yet, gave him a vomit last night. Seems to have done him some good. Had a fowl killed to make him broth. Mr. Walker come, supped, and slept here. Kept a strict guard at night. The next evening, wrote to Mr. Cope, sent Coffee, Kubina, Kamina, Dago, and Lincoln in the canoe to the bay. That evening, a suspicious person come here under pretense of seeking employment. Going to leewards unconcerned, wanted to stay all night, but I made him go back. Take him to be a Frenchman disguised. Now you got to remember, they felt like the French were on the side of the enslaved and were stirring up trouble. He says he has been long a prisoner amongst them. Perhaps he is a person appointed to stir up the Negroes, a Jesuit very likely. Saturday the 7th, employed as usual. Gave our Negroes the afternoon. Received by our canoe a barrel of beef, a firkin of butter, and a bag of mashed biscuits, all which opened and begun upon immediately. Strong party of Cujo's Negroes went by to leeward. This morning the sixth sergeant rode to the bay on a strange horse, gave Syphax a ticket, and made him attend him. But they pressed the horse as he was coming back. Abraham not yet returned. Mr. Bevel, one of the officers belonging to the company he guided, told me he very believes he was killed in Thursday's engagement, but cannot be positive. Mr. Antrobust and Captain Forsyth pressed him. Gave John Groves a fine thread red handkerchief spotted with white. Also gave Little Member one. Mr. Samuel Say dined with me, gave 2 of the militia dinner, and we had a good conversation. Caesar come home from Paradise this afternoon. Mr. Samuel Say and Mr. Walker supped and slept here. About 9 p.m., Mr. Hayward called and says we have destroyed about or near 20 of the rebellious Negroes today. Kept a strict watch all night. Greetings, Sister Raw and the elders listening with you. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm so glad you're here. Was alarmed in the night by a canoe coming up the trench, but made them stop when about halfway up by threatening to fire at them. All the Negroes in the island, that is said, were to have rose at Whitsuntide. But by mistake, Negroes in St. Mary's or St. Mary rose at Easter, and a Negro carrying the wooden sword adorned with parrot's feathers, being the signal of union, some part of Guinea, was discovered by a captain of a Guinea man who saw it carrying in a procession at Spring Path, had the fellow seized, and he discovered the affair. Fire was to have been set to the towns in many places at once, and all the whites who came to help extinguish them were to be murdered in the confusion, whilst the estate Negroes engaged their overseers and others that worked the plantation at the same time. So they did have coordinated attacks, because if they planned to set fire to the towns, right? And then after setting fire to the towns, they planned to kill the white people. That was a coordinated attack. Sunday, June 8th, 1760, that morning, I came in Fibba. Gave nearly 30 tickets to our Negroes to go buy provisions and other resources. That morning, Mr. Thomas Reed, Long Pond overseer, came to see me. Lincoln gave me 2 fine large mountain cabbages, killed one of the young pigs, and had pork for dinner. Note, William Crawford's estate name is Albany, Jacob Rickards, Midgem, and William Ricketts, Ridgeland. Gave a great many grog today. Gave Mr. Martin Bowen some dinner. One of the militia supped and slept here. Kept a strict watch at night. Monday the 9th, about 2 a.m., a party of soldiers, about 22, going to leeward called, gave them each a pint of strong grog. That morning, come, little member, in the bed. Employed carrying earth out of the great pond as last week. Abraham not come yet from Captain Forsyth. He passed through the estate yesterday and today, but would not come home. He clearly loves a lazy life. Now it's interesting that he's talking about Abraham loving a lazy life when in fact these people lived the lazy life because they had everything done for them, right? They were bathed, they were clothed, they were cooked for, they were taken care of. They didn't have to go out there and work the fields, none of that. They had the lazy life. So that was a level of projection onto the enslaved through the enslaver. Achilles yet out, Port Royal wanting this morning, catched and flogged him. So Port Royal ran away again. It is said the rebellious Negroes took the Jerusalem plantation yesterday. It is also said that Salt Spring Negroes in Hanover refuse to work and that a company of soldiers is gone there. That evening, a fire broke out between Coffee Ground and Coffee Ground Path, pieces in the morass. But luckily, we stopped it before it reached the canes. So they were trying to burn the crops. Occasioned by the crabbers setting fire to the stumps. At night, kept a strict guard as usual. Many people called for refreshment. So again, they had resources on the plantation. They just weren't giving the food to the enslaved. Tuesday the 10th, finished getting earth out of the great pond, turning up the mule pen and the pickaninnies cutting and heaping sapphire for bedding the pens. Received a note from Mr. James Marriott. Sent Daniel and Cabina to look for Achilles. Gave Lincoln a new hoe. Juno and Daphne wanting all afternoon, meaning he couldn't find them. Run off the 42nd cistern of liquor. Got 18 small jars of weak, low wines. In the evening, Mr. Parr, who was the late overseer of Midgem, came here, supped and slept. At night, kept a strict guard. The next morning, Thistlewood went to Savannah Lamar. There, news was to be had, and also rumor was rife. Large numbers of prisoners, many of whom were women, were now being brought in by soldiers and militia. It was said that the day before, many of the rebellious Negroes had passed through Glasgow Estate, moving eastward towards the Cabarita River, that they had been pursued and engaged, and that Wager, the rebel leader, otherwise named Apongo, had been killed by Captain Furry of the Maroons. That certainly was rumor. Thistlewood later recorded, Thursday, July 3rd, 1760, William Groves Apongo took and carried by prisoner this evening. He was king of the rebels and despised the late since wounded. Apongo clearly was a remarkable man. Stories about him were many. According to one source, unfortunately unnamed, but probably John Cope, from whom Thistlewood had received much information that day. Wager alias Apongo was a prince in Guinea, tributary to the king of Dahomey. The king of Dahomey was conquered all the country for 100 miles around him. Opongo came to visit the late John Cope of Strathbogie. My employer's father, when governor of Cape Coast Castle, attended by a guard of 100 men, well armed. He was surprised and took prisoner when hunting and sold for a slave, brought to Jamaica and sold to Captain Forrest. In Jamaica, Mr. Cope knew him again, and Wager used, when a slave, sometimes to go to Strathbogie to see Mr. Cope, who had a table set out, a cloth, and other things laid out for him, and would have purchased him and sent him home had Captain Forrest come to the island. Wager came to this country 6 or 7 years ago. So his name was Wager, but he was called Opongo in the island. There is a basic credibility in some of this. In Tacky's rebellion, his fighters had been protected from harm by a power given them by the Obeah men. It is quite possible that Opongo and his people had been given similar protection, which, if it failed, would bring loss of confidence, not in the Obeah, but in the man. And you have to remember, immediately following Tacky's rebellion, the island legislature imposed a penalty of transportation or death on anyone practicing or claiming to practice Obeah. The kingdom of Dahomey had been greatly expanded under the leadership of Agaja, who reigned from 1708 until 1732. John Cope Sr., buried at Savannah Lamar in February 1756 in his 55th year, had at one time been governor of Cape Coast Castle, and Opongo would seem to have reached Jamaica at about 1753 or 1754. But it is difficult to see how Captain Forrest's absenteeism could have prevented the purchase of one of his slaves. John Cope the son, if he was the relator of all this, was perhaps making excuses for his father, but there was a slightly conflicting story from Stephen Parkinson, who said that Opongo had been with Captain Forrest in England in the ship Wager, which was how he got his name. It is also rumored that Wager's original intention had been to wait until the ships in Savannah Lamar, Roadstead, had sailed before launching his attack, but that he and his wife quarreled in the Negro ground. She had threatened to disclose his plans, and so he had immediately gone into action, right? So he had a different plan. He had planned to wait until it was the most advantageous time, but his wife, whom he had a fight with, was going to rat him out. So he had to immediately go into action. But there were other things which Opongo himself reportedly said. Wednesday, July 30th, Dr. Gorse says Wager told him, when tried, that the night they broke out, he advised coming directly to the bay, but the others were afraid too much. On the day before he had been sentenced, today Mr. Antrobus, Monsignors Gallagher, Lister, and others guarded Wager, the king of the rebels, to Captain Forrest. He is to hang in chains in 3 days, then be took down and burnt. I gave him grog, asked Wager if he knew any of our Negroes. He said he knew Louis and wished him goodbye. Wager died before he could take him down for they could take him down for burning. So too did Captain Forrest Goliath, who, gibbeted while alive Tuesday noon, was alive when I went down at about 10 a.m., but dead by noon, Thursday, June 19th. He cut off Mr. Rutherford's thigh and pulled out his eyes while still alive. On July, in July, on Friday the 11th, in Savannah, Lamar, Thistlewood says, saw Forrest Davy put up alive in the gibbets. They gave him bread and cheese and grog before he was hoisted up. Thistlewood and others watched. Last Friday, this was Thursday the 17th, Davy, who is gibbeted alive, seeing David Lopez and another white person fighting, said, that's good for me. Me love for see so. And seeing a monkey leap upon a pail of water a Negro wench was carrying on her head, laughed heartily and said, that monkey damned rogue, true? Davy died on Friday the 18th at about 11 a.m. Others who led or notably contributed in the rebellion included a guy who was a hunter for his king in Guinea. Simon was one of the said king's captains. He frequently reprimanded a guy for his immoderate love of women. A guy who belonged to Thomas Williams' estate was reported shot on the 31st of July. Simon was not among those killed or captured. In late September, he was reported as having led a party of the rebels to high windward away from the plains of Westmoreland. Some, such as Cardiff, suffered the full torture. Tuesday, September 3rd, Mr. Cope says Cardiff, who was burnt at the bay, told him and many others present that multitudes of Negroes had took swear that if they failed of success in the rebellion, to rise again the same day 2 years, and advised them to be upon their guard, and was going to make further discoveries, but accusing Colonel Barclay's Tackey and others, put the colonel in a rage, so that he called the marshal villain for not making a fiercer fire, a sad mistake. Thistlewood had no sympathy with the rebellious Negroes. He wished them all the dirtiest punishment and had little use for any who seemed to show leniency. Now, the author here says in a note, how, we might wonder, would he have reacted to the activities and the punishment in 1820 of his nephew, Arthur Thistlewood of Twofoam, who was the leader of the Cato Street conspiracy to assassinate members of the British cabinet of the day and set up a new provisional government, right? Arthur Thistlewood's plan was divulged by one of his fellow conspirators. Remember, two can keep a secret if one is dead. And following his information, the Duke of Wellington, who was then the Prime Minister, and other ministers took steps to thwart the plotters, one of whom, William Davison, was said to be a West Indian. Thistlewood and his associates were cornered, and after a fight, which a Bow Street runner was killed, eventually captured and tried, Thistlewood and 4 others, including Davison, were executed. Others were imprisoned or deported. So as you can see, they had total annihilation in mind. On Thursday, July 17th, yesterday, Captain Forrest Fortune, a principal offender, came in to Colonel Witter, who gave him a ticket to go home to Mace Muir, policy or something else. And on the same day, more approvingly, Colonel Staggs, off with the heads of all the rebels who fall into his hands immediately. He says he is sent to destroy the rebels, and destroy them he will to the utmost of his power, except women and children. Whatever may have been behind Colonel Witter's apparent leniency, however, it was not to be allowed. Thursday, August 21st, yesterday in the evening, Major Cope and several troopers went to Savannah Lamar with Forrest Campbell and old Thomas Williams Negroes, such as were notorious but had come in of themselves and had tickets from Colonel Witter, seized unawares. While earlier in the day, about noon, there had been another group of Moreland Negroes similarly escorted. At the end of September, the imprisoned Negroes were still in Savannah Lamar, and it was said that they would be transported. Kwaku and Abraham, two of only 3 Egypt slaves who were suspected by Thistlewood to be actively engaged in the rebellion, were sent to join them. On Tuesday, September 30th, Kwaku and Abraham head down to the bay in the large canoe to Mr. Myler to be transported with the rebels. Also, Modes Hazat out of Salt River Dungeon, several pair of Paradise Negroes, including Sawyer, Cujo, Duke, and others from Jacobsfield, Mason Quashie, Mulatto Davy, Pompey, Sharper, Humphrey, and R. Plato in the canoe. And at Savannah Lamar, they perhaps saw one of the St. Mary's rebels now in gibbets at the bay. He looks about them. The proposed transportation did not take place. At the beginning of October, the prisoners were still in the fort at the bay, and it was the hope of Mr. Thistlewood and others that they would be executed. It would seem that only a couple of the Egypt slaves were directly involved in the rebellion, though Thistlewood has suspected that several were aware of the intention to rise. Saturday, October 18th, he writes, note, at the beginning of the rebellion, a shaved head amongst the Negroes was the signal of war. The very day our Jackie, Job, Achilles, Quasheba, Rosanna, and others had their heads remarkably shaved, Quasheba's brother fell in the rebellion. The only one who was actually hunted as a rebel was Achilles, who had run off the estate after threatening Daniel in early June. Saturday, August the 9th, in the morning betimes, John Groves, Mason Quashie, Jackie, Job Coffey, Kamina, and Daniel went armed with 5 guns, cutlasses, and other tools to look for Achilles and his companions. They found many huts, katakans, raw cassava, and cassava dakunu. The dakunu was another African delicacy. It was plantain, green banana, sweet potato, or other food seasoned, wrapped in plantain or banana leaf, and boiled and less commonly baked. They found that in a fire roasting, but no Negroes. So they must have just left. Plenty of water in the calabashes, rum in one, and made prize of all and burnt the huts. They found many beef bones, some ropes, and other provisions, so they were beef stealers. I stood ambushed in the morass, armed with my gun pistols and others, in case any had come that way. Achilles remained at liberty until Saturday, December the 6th, when, at about 3 p.m., our Achilles, whose alias was Hercules, and Paradise Achilles came home together of their own accord. I secured them in the bilboes. 2 days later, Egypt, Plato, and Jackie escorted them to the Salt River dungeon. Abraham, it will be recalled, had been sent off as a guide with Captain Forsyth also in early June. He simply failed to return. At one time, he was thought killed, but on Monday, the 25th of August, Mason Kwashi and Daniel brought home Abraham, whom they found helping to haul the scene at the Hope Barcadier, secured him in the bilboes. There were, of course, other runaways from Egypt during the year. Egypt Kwaku, for instance, was away for a prolonged period and on one occasion was spotted and shot at. On Tuesday, August the 26th, Mason Kwashi and Daniel come upon Kwaku and 4 more runaway Negro men in Punch's Ground, both shot, and Kwashi says he believes he hit one of them, but got none, only their katakans, crabs, and other provisions. So they were using the enslaved people against other enslaved people. So instead of turning the guns on the masters and the overseers, these were probably drivers, right, or slave hunters that would go and find the enslaved person and would have enmity with the enslaved person, like, nigga, get your ass back here. And obviously, there were, on the other hand, those such as Mason Kwashi, Daniel, Old Sharper, and the members of the Black Shot groups, who, like the Maroons, but for different reasons, sided with the masters. Thursday, September 4th, our Black party was out in the morning again, and before noon brought home 3 Negro men. They catched in the Salt Savannah Islands. All pretended to be fishermen. One says his name is Gloucester and belongs to Colonel Ricketts. The second, Batchwell, to Midgem Estate. The third, Pompey, to Force. Wrote to Mr. Cope and sent them to him. In times of rebellion, it would be risky to be a non-combatant runaway. The Maroons, as we have seen, were much involved. It was said that Colonel Cujo had long before wrote to Colonel Barclay and the gentlemen of this parish to warn them of this that was happened. Maroon parties were constantly on the move, and Thistlewood had occasion to entertain. Documenting. Sunday, July 20th, Colonel Witter, Mr. Cope, Mr. Douglas, Mr. Ferris, Mr. Copige, Mr. John Tomlinson, all dined at Egypt. Also Cujo. He has a prodigious hump on his shoulders or back, and not so tall as me. Captain Qua and others were with him. And they, the Maroons, were paradoxically an inspiration to the rebellious slaves at whom they shot on sight, right? Friday, August 1st, Dr. Miller says, the rebels give out they will kill all the Negroes they can as soon as dry weather comes, fire all the plantations they can till they force the whites to give them free, like Cujo's Negroes. So they didn't understand the dynamics of Cujo's Negroes, but they understood that those Negroes were free to come and go as they please, free to do what they want, free to live life. By the end of June, the rebellion had been broken. On the morning of Sunday the 22nd, the warships sailed from Savannah Lamar roadstead. Mr. Thistlewood went into his garden and drew some radishes, which he had for dinner. And then come Warsaw in the Curing House corn loft. The alarms and excursions, however, continued, and the torturous punishments of rebels captured, as did the excesses and excitements of the soldiery. Tuesday, June 24th, last night, about 11 o'clock, Monsignors Say and Walker called me up requesting me to be upon guard, as the Negroes was driven from the mountains and were come into Peter's Plain about 2 miles from us. Immediately I fixed a watch as usual and called all is well. Both John and me sat up all the rest of the night. In mid-November, one evening, just after dark, Captain Forsyth arrived at Egypt with 20 rangers, mulattoes, and Negroes, besides 6 or 8 baggage Negroes and some Negro boys. They stayed overnight before going into the salt savannah to search out rebels and runaways. So they had about 28, or they had between 26 and 28 black people helping them hunt down other black people, right? Forsyth occupied Mr. Cope's bed in the great house. I wonder what that means. 2 white people that were with him and all the Negroes and company laid in the northeast room of the great house. The Negroes served a gallon of our rum. They got drunk and attempted to break open the Negro house doors to come at the girls. So you see that? They got drunk and they wanted to go rape the girls. I was obliged to get out of bed, take my pistols, and go to quiet them, which soon effected, but they fought after, one amongst the other, until almost midnight. The movements of the Negroes between the various estates was watched and discussed. Thomas Williams Negroes were at Paul Island last night, which was Monday, June the 30th. Have not learned the reason why. And about a month later, Louis of Egypt at Macemuir, also almost every night. Thistlewood did not, on this account, limit his own issue of tickets, but he seems to have warned the Egypt slaves not to move off the estate without them. On Saturday, the 23rd of August, for instance, gave our Negroes extraordinary charge to work in their fields. He issued no tickets the following day, but on Sunday, the 31st, he gave out tickets as usual. Not all other estate owners or overseers were being so careful. As the threat of immediate danger diminished, so they had begun to relax controls. Greetings, Bwana Haguziki. Thanks so much for tuning in. How are you tonight? I'm so glad you're here. Whether or not his suspicions were alarmist, he maintained through the rest of the year the managerial policy which may well have saved him great distress in the harder days. He kept the Egypt slaves as busy as he could. He tended them when sick. He flogged them when he thought they erred. He regularly gave them their allowances of food and clothing and liquor, and sometimes extras for good labor or performance. He allowed them, even in the midst of rebellion, their Sunday tickets to move about, but he held them in strict control. So, this particular writer is trying to say that Thistlewood, as sick and as depraved as he is, had a paternalistic view of his role during slavery, that he took care of them. He took care of them when they were sick. He only flogged them when he thought they erred. He gave them their allowances of food and clothing and liquor, and sometimes even gave them extras for unusual labor or good performance. Right. This is the same man that had them defecating in each other's mouths a year ago. So don't believe the hype. Wednesday, and he was still sexually assaulting the women, right? While he had his gonorrhea infected penis. Right. Wednesday, the 24th of December, driver Johnny, drumming at the Negro House last night, flogged him for it. Thursday, December 25th, being Christmas Day, gave it to the Negroes, gave strict charge to the Negroes to make no noise. Meanwhile, instructions had been received by the custos, Colonel Barclay, from the governor that the militia, horse and foot, should be on patrol from the middle to the end of December and should ensure that no Negro moved off his plantation without a ticket. It is difficult to illustrate the views of whites on the possible causes of rebellion. They were certainly aware of Tacky's struggle and defeat in St. Mary, and some had received letters telling them of thwarted uprisings elsewhere, even as far away as St. Thomas in the east. But Thistlewood gives no hint of awareness of a plan for a general uprising throughout the island, nor did they seem to think that any such uprising could be engineered solely by slave leadership. This is why they didn't want the Jesuit or the Frenchman coming in to work their plantation, because they felt that they were the ones that would stir up the slaves to want freedom, not recognizing that seeing the Maroons with the amount of liberty and freedom that they had also inspired a heart toward freedom in the enslaved population. Saturday, July 12th, Mr. Parkinson and company called. He suspects some of those who pass for Jew distillers to be Jesuits and stir up the Negroes, or perhaps there may be black Jesuits in the island amongst the Negroes, right? Nonetheless, they knew an old rhyme which seemed to suggest that the blacks had an objective, not necessarily inspired by Jesuits of whatever color. Friday, October the 24th, Mr. John Stewart called and dined with me. He says there is an old saying or proverb which frightens many people. 1763, Jamaica no more an island shall be, not for the whites. In the latter months of the year, conditions in Egypt state returned to normal. There were fewer alarms and invasions by troops in search of food and shelter, and fewer instances of news of attacks and reprisals. Several of the slaves went down in an epidemic of measles. They included Little Member, who had recently become Thistlewood's #1 girl, Fibba, his wife, and their child, to whom he still referred to as Fibba's child, and who was, in fact, like Fibba, the property of John Cope, Esquire, also suffered. Fibba tending little John, who had the measles, herself had a hard swelling on one of her breasts, but don't hurt much, she says. Lincoln, seemingly unhappy with Violet, with whom he occasionally fought, had got the clap, he says from Little Doll. So he was supposed to be slave married to Violet. They were always fighting, and he went to Little Doll to have sex, and he got gonorrhea from her. The information must have interested Thistlewood, who was himself uneasy in his private parts and had recently been entertained by Little Doll, and except for the final entry, the diary jottings for the last day of the year carried nothing of the recent troubles. Wednesday, December 31st, 1760. Employed junking and getting out copper wood. Received home 13 cartloads, which equals 107 loads now home in all. Flanders hewing headings, Mason Quashie repairing under the coppers. Pero and Neptune making mortar and tending him. David sawing lathes. The morning, Plato sifting lime. Received home a cartload of sifted lime. Morning, broke in the cotton tree piece corn. 168 good dung baskets. Brought it home in the canoe and put up in the corn loft. Have Quashie and Davy with me. Pickled some sapphire today. Running continues, stains but little, seems waterish. Urine scalds yet, urethra sore, somewhat inflamed. Weakness of parts continues. Took balsam, capivi. Have given out since the beginning of June 767 tickets. Mr. Crawford's Jackie condemned and burnt by a slow fire. So, as you can see, they said that the enslaved population had various reasons for wanting their freedom, right? You have to recognize that these Akan people that were fighting to be free wanted to replace the enslaver class. So, in their desire to want to replace the enslaver class, they recognized that they needed to annihilate, they were dealing with African ideologies and an African centered worldview. Because if you kill your enemy and you take his place, then you get to do the business that he does. That's like an African centered worldview, right? That you'll get the same connections, the same respect, the same type of deals that he's getting. So if you replace the enslaver class, you will at that point be the enslaver and you'll be the one driving the enslaved population. It won't be me enslaved, it'll be you enslaved. So that's what they wanted to do. And I think that's a flawed plan. I think that you can't replace the enslaver class, right? You have to create a new type of economy. You have to rely on the relationships and connections that you can build. You have to be able to, in your agrarian society, first and foremost, feed yourself. Once you can feed yourself, then you begin to go about building connections and other relationships with other types of people. Greetings, Moana Hagaziki. How are you tonight?
I'm good. I apologize for being late, matron, but I caught the last end
Mm-hmm.
of the conversation. I will listen to the playback,
Mm-hmm.
but something that you said, two things you said that really jogged my mind when you mentioned the fact of the French slavers, and they were careful of the French slavers coming in, and I'm thinking about the time because it's kind of early
Mm-hmm.
because I'm thinking that they would probably be cautious of the Frenchmen coming in particular from Saint Domingue, because they wouldn't want that information of what was going on in Haiti to spread. But since
Mm-hmm.
it's early, since it's early, they probably wouldn't have been so cautious. Well, the caution would probably be, for another reason as opposed to what happened in 1804.
Mm-hmm.
But what I really wanted to talk about really was this idea of paternalism, the idea of paternalism, and how Thistlewood thought that him, I guess, on Christmas, giving little extras. That's the word they use, extras to the
Hmm.
slaves, and allowing them tickets to roam outside of the plantation. And these people still have this idea of paternalism. They think they are. They think that we are the children of the world. They think the black man and the black woman are the children of the world. We need to always be taken care of. We always should see them as our fathers and mothers because they know the right way to instruct us. And I rail against that idea completely, completely. And
Hmm.
I fight to be an independent person because I think that a lot of us have internalized these ideas of the white man paternalistic view of the world. The white man is not my father. Let me get that straight. John Bull and Uncle Sam are not my father. I have a father. I had a father. I had a father. So I don't
That's
look to them to have this. Oh, they know the best way to take care of me, a grown adult black man. And I think that a lot of us carry these ideas into the 21st century, where we're gonna let the government take care of our children. We're gonna
right.
let the government feed us. We're gonna let the government provide for us, provide us with clothes, housing, shelter. All these things I believe to be carryovers of these ideas that existed way back when. What do you say to that?
I think that there's a modicum of truth to that. I think that one of the things that enslavement did is it took away the black man's ability to be responsible for himself and his family. Now, they resisted that idea as enslaved people because, they whether they fought with the master or they slowed down their work day or they went and complained to the protector of slaves and to the people around them that were willing to listen to their complaints, and especially in the Caribbean islands. I think that they felt that that level of manhood and responsibility was slowly stripped from them over and over and over again. And I think that that changed us in some ways. I think that especially when you look at the institutions that they build these paternalistic institutions because you go to your job, right? And at your job, they give you a paycheck, health insurance, they tell you when to work, they orchestrate and organize your day. Um, but then you do not take your non working time to build something else because you're often too tired. And I think it's taken away that drive for us to build something else outside of them because they make it seem so comfortable. Oh, they've taken care of that. One of the best things they could have done was to take away like pensions from people because that means you now have to plan for your future. Your employer can match, but you're not just going to work and work and work and slave for these people and then expect some pittance of what they will give you, because what they give you they can take away. And we don't often face that reality that what they give us, they can take away. And once we realize that and we step into our full humanity of self actualization, then I think we'll be better off.
I absolutely agree with that. I absolutely agree with that. And I, even though living in the Caribbean has very short forms, because we don't have as much access to the, I guess, the trinkets of the Western world. You have to
Hmm.
improvise. You have to learn to do for yourself a whole lot of time because the government will not take care of you. And I see that as a good and a bad thing, but I do see it as a good thing because you learn the idea of how to be self-sufficient.
Hmm.
Self-sufficiency is key for me personally on a personal level, and I work
Hmm.
towards that. Um, Also, I think that the idea of the Maroons, I have a love-hate relationship with.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
because the Maroons were self-sufficient. They decided not to live on the master's time. They decided not to live within that arena. They created something for themselves and they created their own time.
Hmm.
However, however, when you have the idea of escaping slaves trying to join with the Maroons, a lot of the Maroons turn them back over to the masters.
Hmm.
Especially in Jamaica, I have a little bit of issue with that. I have
Hmm.
a bit of an issue with that. I
Yeah.
don't understand what the idea was in that. Maybe Thistlewood didn't really talk about it, but and address
Well,
it.
one of the things that they talk about are the agreements and peace treaties that the Maroons signed with the British colonial government, where they would stop the wars and they would stop fighting with them if they returned runaway slaves and participated in putting down slave insurrections and fought against foreigners and wars for them and with them side by side. So the Maroons made
Oh,
a
it was a
devil's bargain.
contractual agreement.
It was a
Okay,
contractual agreement, and they made a devil's bargain because they wanted to
I
protect
see.
and preserve their peace, right? But
I see.
they did not allow these other people to come into the fold that ran away. And one of the things that I think about is I'm wondering, were these people being returned or turned away from maroon societies when they would run away for days and weeks and months at a time? Because he often talks about this slave is wanting and that slave is wanting, meaning they had run away, but they came back after a few days, a few months, a few weeks. Some of them would find other employment. Um, and he doesn't really say anything about it. But what I know from the history of the Maroons is that, because I looked that up because I was pissed, right, about the fact that the Maroons were even a part of this process of turning away enslaved people, you know, because they themselves had once been enslaved, but they were trying to protect their peace.
Yeah, it was about survival, but I still feel a way about it.
Hmm.
I gotta tell you,
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
still feel a way about it. But we are we are just the people of history, and in this time we can look back and always criticize and judge, but we're not living in them times, and the
Right.
decisions that they would have made would probably be much vastly different if we was living in those times. So I understand that idea. I just it doesn't sit well with me in 2026,
Yeah.
but I do understand.
Well, and something else that you have to think about is runaways ran away for many different reasons, whether it was they're contesting the working conditions or they were being sexually assaulted or they were um, actually wanting to be free and liberated. And these people had a variety of drives and motivations, and they came together to form this community of Maroons that said, I'm not going back to that. And I think that I don't think that we judge them harshly enough because before diving off into that topic, I had only known of the Maroons that resisted, right? I didn't know about this agreement that Maroons made with the British colonial government to actually work with them side by side to keep us enslaved. But what's interesting is that one of the things that they documented about uh, the Tacky's rebellion is that they wanted to replace the enslaver class. So they wanted slaves themselves and they wanted to be the ones running things. And that brings up when you hear some people say a lot of black people don't necessarily want freedom, they just want the opportunity to hold the whip. And that is disturbing. That is
Yeah, well,
disturbing.
if you think about it, the victim sometimes become the victimizer.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's a crazy thing. Like you hear some people nowadays in their conversations, they sound like the people who would was used to formerly oppress them.
Mhm.
And I think that, as you say, they don't necessarily want to be free. They just want to replace. They want to be the person actually holding the whip, and it's an unfortunate thing. But as you do your work,
Mhm.
we have to rail against the fray. We have to rail against that and fight against that, because since we understand history, I think that we have the advantage of at least attempting to try to change it. At least attempting to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I absolutely agree. And we have to change the paradigm that says we want to replace the oppressor class. We don't want to replace, I never wanted to replace white people in society. I wanted to build something new. You know, one of the terms I often use is called communalism, where you express internal socialism, external capitalism. So you have to, define your group. Once you have defined your group and assessed the resources that you can generate without any external help, you then make those one price for your group and another price for the external group. You have in group and out group pricing so that you're able to take care of the people you want to take care of, but you're able to negotiate flat footed and firm with the other and the outsider.
I actually agree with that idea, but it's no buts. The trick of what you said is to get people to have buy-in.
Mm-hmm.
And with us, we are very difficult to convince, man. It's
Mm-hmm.
the Marcus Garvey say that one of the most difficult things in him building his movement is trying to convince the Negro about himself, trying to build that self confidence, in trying to make him understand that we could do it as well. We could do it too. I just need to convince you and have buy into this idea. And I think that this is the trick that I don't know. I don't know how to do it, Matron. I try, I try,
Mm-hmm.
but we are almost swimming against the tide, because it's like the black man has been sitting in a class of 400 years being told that he was nothing, he could never be nothing. And the only answer or solution to him improving himself is to the white man ice is colder. You got to sign on to that. You got to sign on to that. So it's a very difficult thing to do, but we're gonna attempt to try to do it anyways. We have done the impossible in history. The fact that I am talking to you currently from where I am talking to you from, and you are talking to me where you are talking to me from, we are not supposed to exist currently in the Western world. We are supposed to go to where the Indians.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that we have been able to make it, it speaks to our resiliency. So we could perform the impossible in that task. In moving forward, we could also, do the impossible as well. The black man ain't incapable of doing the impossible. I don't believe so.
I absolutely agree. One of the things that the European has over us is that they still have their established kinship ties. And we work hard to go about trying to reestablish those kinship ties, whether people go about the genetic testing or trying to trace a family tree. But records were destroyed, and records are degraded. Records that exist are degraded. And so it's very difficult to go back and say, I know you're my cousin. So we have to create the families like they created on the slave ship. Like, this is my cousin, and I'm going to respect you as my family. And we, like I said, getting that buy in from other people is the hardest part, because that's what they did in certain instances, is they recreated kinship ties because you have a different affinity for someone that you respect as family versus someone that you just see as another person that is your color, you know. So we have to get to the point where we're working hard to reestablish and establish kinship ties with one another, and that affinity and affection that comes into play, because all other people groups have that. You know, the Asians have it, the whites have it, the Indians even have it. You know, they decide who's their in group and out group. They decide who's their impoverished class and who isn't, versus us, which we believe in this rugged individualism, which we're the only ones that make that work. And then they come and they strategically extract those magical Negroes from our general society and population by putting non Black partners with those people, or giving them and feeding them a consciousness that is directly detrimental to the empowerment of Black people.
Well, one of the things that I could appreciate what Black people has done in the Western world is, in terms of reframing and how we relate to one another,
Mhm.
and so-called delineating. I'll use that word for this particular instance, that we call each other brother and sister. In the Caribbean, they say brethren or sistren, but the African Americans, I hear them say brother and sister. I think that that is a word. See, I would never when I hear that word, then I'm conditioned in a certain way, because I
Mhm.
would never treat my brother and sister like I would treat a stranger.
Mhm.
But that word has been replaced with the word nigga.
Mhm.
So that there is a foreign element to how you reframe that word as opposed to brother and sister. If I relate to you as my brother and my sister, I hear this new term called cousin now, which is another familial word. I know I am a part of a grouping of people. So
Mhm.
I have to relate to that person much differently than I call a person Mr., Sir, or whatever their name is. So I think that it's a step in the right direction. It's a step in the right direction. It's not a complete panacea or cure for what our issues are, but I think that reframing how we relate to one another, even in how in words, not necessarily in deeds as yet, but in words, I think it's a step in the right direction.
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree, you know, and we have to keep that up. And, you know, they continue to introduce things into our communities, especially with the American Negro or American African American or the American Black, however you want to say it, that erodes those kinship ties. You know, it was crack, it was drugs, it was heroin, it was um, alienation of the man from the household. It was prostituting the woman. Now they have put the prostituted woman with the whore consciousness and given her an education. So now she's trying to analyze these things from a perspective of sex worker and all of these different things they continue to try to throw at us to erode those kinship ties. But at the end of the day, I look at you as my brother. At the end of the day, I look at Consider Chief as my sister. At the end of the day, I see you all as my family. And we have to reinforce that so that all of these different things that they continue to throw at us are thwarted instead of taking hold and seeping into the root and poisoning and preventing us from forming those kinship ties and connections. You know, there are stories of white communities that existed that just made up whole genealogies for themselves where where they decided that okay, we are a town and we're going to create a crest and we're going to give some authority to ourselves and we're going to define ourselves based on these great powerful ancestors, and they did that and they wrote books about it. That's what genealogical societies are all about, but we don't use them that way. We use genealogical societies to find out the truth, not to make up lies.
Yeah, and I get the African American has went through a lot of bullshit, especially
Mhm.
being 14% of the population. It is an onslaught, a continuous one. So I get that completely. And Brother Bakari used to like tell me about Mumbai, Mississippi. This
Mhm.
little enclave where you could get away, at least, find some oasis with that onslaught of racism and continuous barragement of the nonsense they've been facing every day. And my only suggestion and I know people are fighting against that completely, is connecting. You must connect with the rest of the Black world. I think
Mm-hmm.
that that is a feature for African Americans because you won't get it from Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam will not give you it. They just had something in the UN where the United States of America, after everything that the African American has done in building the nation of Africa, the United States of America, they still say no, matron. They still
Mm-hmm.
say no. They still say it's not. If the transatlantic slavery was not the worst thing in humanity, what is? What is? So
Yeah.
if that's their ultimate conclusion, I think that the brothers and sisters in the United States have to do well. Really have to take a second look at the rest of the world. You have to make other kinds of connections because they gonna always say no.
Mm-hmm.
They gonna always say no. So you must have to say okay. And I'm not saying to get rid of the country of your birth, but there must be an alternative. There must be an alternative because you're not gonna find the humanity you're looking for in the place that you live in. Not that I find it there either, by the way. But there needs to be a connection and a hookup to the greater Black world. It needs to be that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that one of the things, there's this song that says, it's called Black Butterfly. It says, sail across the waters, tell your sons and daughters where the struggle begins. Black Butterfly. And I always interpreted that song to mean send yourself or send your bloodline across an ocean because you will find a connection to the greater Black world if you do that. Do you know what I'm saying? You will find an opportunity whereas you don't have one in your country of birth. You will find, some of the things that you are looking for because the struggle begins at home. And it's not until you take your skills, time, talent, and motivation across an ocean that you are able to actually actualize the promise of what it is to be entrepreneurial, to be Black brilliance, to be Black excellence.
Well, for me, how I how I kind of put it succinctly, I
Mm-hmm,
say go where you are appreciated and not tolerated.
mm-hmm,
So if you find an audience of people, because me personally, I see the value in the things of what you do, and I appreciate it so much.
mm-hmm,
And like I say, no one has to appreciate it. I appreciate it, but
mm-hmm,
from my own reasoning and my own thinking about some of the things that I'm hearing in your work and the work of others as well. You must go where you are appreciated and not just tolerated. Why
mm-hmm,
stay where you are tolerated and not appreciated? No, you could find a place where you're appreciated. And I'm not trying to tell people to go elsewhere. I'm just saying that there are other audiences who may appreciate and love what you do, as opposed to just remain in a situation where you are just tolerated as opposed to appreciated.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, yeah. And that's the ultimate goal. Like you said, to go where you are appreciated. Too often, we find ourselves in situations where we're tolerated and where things are sometimes intolerable in that situation where we are tolerated. But if we go where we're appreciated, we'll find the resource that we need. We'll find the community that we need to build in order to be the best Black selves that we can be.
Yeah, so I'll just leave it there, matron. I know it's 11. Everybody got to get up in the morning. We got to go to do what we got to do.
Gotta
But I
go do what we
appreciate
gotta
you
do.
until we don't. Until we
Until
don't.
we don't. That's
Until
right.
we don't. But I appreciate your readings as well. Like I say, you're doing great work, and I hope the listeners, um, Raw Itel and Forecast and whoever else is listening, is learning from the things that you are reading and taking it and trying to use that information for their own self improvement and self development. I'll leave it there, matron. Thank you very much for the time.
Well, thank you, Bawana Hagaziki. I appreciate you. Every time you hit hard, you have points that are necessary. You give us another level of analysis and information, and you ask such wonderful questions. So thank you. I want to thank Sister Raw and the and the elders listening with her and the forecast radio for being here. I want to thank Bwana Haguziki for being here. I know that Anthony McPhail is listening. I know that Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast is listening. I know that KW Don 7 is listening. I know that Rare Rooster Opening is listening, and you. Yes, you, dear listener, you are listening, and I appreciate each and every one of you. I will be back Tuesday where we'll be reading chapter 6 of In Miserable Slavery, the Thomas Thistlewood Diaries. Thank you so much for tuning in. Peace, guys.